Chapter 32, Let There Be Light. It was 1992. I was preparing to leave for another evidentiary hearing in the Los Angeles County Court building downtown. Prior to my departure, Tretch, Evil, and I collaborated on a book of poems entitled Unchained Voices with hopes of getting it published. Benita had contacted a noted black historian and author, Runoko Rashidi, who agreed to edit our work and try to find a publisher. The possibility of having our literary work in print and bearing fruits of wisdom for our homeboys and society had all three of us hyped up. Early in the morning, when the black and white sheriff's county bus drove away from San Quentin, I reflected upon the prospects of our literary project. I was also trying to digest the latest news about a riot in South Central, a reaction to white Los Angeles cops being acquitted for beating black motorist Rodney King. It was a Felix Culpa fortunate fault that a citizen with a video camera captured the public flogging. Mainstream society would not have believed the brutal police injustice that black people know all too well. The Los Angeles Police Department described the brutal beating as an isolated incident. The unshocking fact that a predominantly Caucasian jury acquitted the four cops had South Central inhabitants bracing for a volatile response. Though the county bus was miles away from Los Angeles, the air had a caustic charged smell. Public frustration and despair had ignited a riot. In the far distance, a thick, black cloud of smoke hovered over South Central like a suffocating blanket. I arrived at the Los Angeles County Jail and was placed in a one-man holding tank where I saw the words, "Crips and Bloods United Forever," scrawled on the wall in big black letters. A dientente is something for all Crips and Bloods to consider. Regardless of how much we might celebrate each vindictive strike against one another, in the long run, we all lose. My evidentiary hearing was turning out to be a lopsided version of justice. For a defendant, it's a legal crapshoot, especially when the state-appointed defense attorney's preparation and case management are perfunctory. But during the few weeks of court proceedings, I did manage to contact the black author, Runoko Rashidi. It was an awkward moment when Runoko brought up an incident during which my homeboys and I had jacked him up for money. This was probably true, but I could neither deny nor confirm it. I did express my gratitude for his offer to help us. Benita visited on a regular basis and made sure I had more than enough money for canteen. She turned out to be a dedicated woman who even looked out for Evil and Tretch. Even after Benita got married, she still came to the Los Angeles County Jail to visit me. During one of her visits, we were interrupted by Baboon, a West Side Crip from way back. He acted a complete fool, hollering, "Hey Tookie, long time no see, cousin." Armed with an expression resembling the Baboon, he wanted the world to know he was a ghetto thug through and through. After Baboon calmed down a bit, off but 10 seconds, he said boisterously, "Wait a minute, cuz, I got a surprise for you. Be right back." He returned in a moment with little Pam, who was beaming from ear to ear. During our chat, Pam revealed that she was now a legal investigator and would be visiting me in the attorney room. Both Pam and Baboon gave me their phone numbers, suggesting I could call often. Days later, I was told Baboon had been gunned down in retaliation for another murder. There was a heated war going on between some of the Crips and local Mexicans. When blacks weren't killing one another, then trigger-happy cops or other people were trying to wipe us out. This ghetto martyrdom had gotten out of hand, with Bloods, other blacks, and my homeboys disappearing fast. Hundreds of homeboys I knew personally had been murdered for an illegitimate legacy of embedded cultural racism. From Buddha on down to each dead Crip, we acted invincible, but knew in our gut that we wouldn't live long. When Pam came to visit me, her investigator's license had expired and she was arrested on the spot for trying to visit with an invalid license. Talking to her later that night, her voice quivered as she talked about how they had interrogated her about me. This wasn't the same brash Pam I knew more than a decade ago. She was literally scared to death. She asked, "What in the world have you been doing, Tookie, that caused those crazy people to question me about you?" I told her I hadn't been doing anything, but my past would forever be used against me. While in high power at the Los Angeles County Jail, I began to revisit the devils of my past. This critical reflection exposed a litany of fiascos, scandals, mayhem, nihilism, and the deaths of my homeboys, ending with the Crips entity fading into obscurity. At that moment, I knew that my life as a Crip had come to an end, In a cold sweat, I shook myself out of this awful reverie, consumed by sadness, not for Crippin, but for the lives of all Crips who had died, for the innocent black lives hurt in the crossfire, for the decades of young lives ruined for a costless cause. Wide awake, I lay there thinking about how, most of my life, I lived it for Crip, but the Crip God had abandoned me. I had poked so many holes in the thin fabric of my thug experience that I could no longer sustain a conscious apology for Crippin. During the bus ride back to San Quentin, I realized I was wading into uncharted territory that would bring unwanted attention on me from prison authorities. They would try at every turn to discredit me, but I was game. In this game, authority versus prisoner, the chances of my succeeding in atoning and changing were very slim. But I didn't have to stand alone. Tretch and Evil were undergoing the same transition from thug to thinking black man with a purpose. This is a concept, redemption, that criminologists, prison authorities, psychologists, and law enforcement officers refuse to believe unless the transformation is accomplished under the spirit-breaking guidelines. Back at San Quentin and in the hole, I was placed in the first cell, 52 on the second tier, one cell away from ghetto. I began studying more black history. I attribute the restoration of my self-confidence and self-worth to reading about my ancestors in America and Africa. I began to see that all I had learned from some Caucasians and Uncle Tom about black reflections of myself were lies. Recapturing a more accurate picture of black history inspired all of us on the yard to teach ourselves to speak Swahili. We had to become autodidactic, self-taught, and continue learning from one another as well. Outside on the yard, after each exhaustive workout of burpees and Kenya laps, very fast laps, we walk around in small groups and practice speaking Swahili. When young Kerm moved into the cell between me and Ghetto, our study regimen included him in an hour each workday practicing Swahili. Studying was easy compared to controlling my temper. Since childhood, my temper or rage was an explosive defense mechanism, whether triggered by threat or irritant. Controlling my temper would be a matter of resolution and discipline. I resolved to transition my rage into something more beneficial. For decades, I have participated in my own dehumanization. The word menticide, brainwashing, coined by black psychologist Bobby Wright, perfectly depicts my state of mind. I had been menticided about my culture, my ethnicity, and my purpose. There was much work that had to be done to reverse the damage. I have to rehumanize myself. I have no roadmap. Though I really didn't know how to accomplish the task, I knew how to indulge in hours of gazing into the hypnotic box, TV, dulling my senses with drugs, gambling, in any form, internationally drawing attention, or losing myself in the fantasy world of pornographic sex with two-dimensional females. But one result of the conversion was our ability to introduce the concept of autodidactics to the younger generation of Crips entering death row, lest they too be too corrupted by the duplicitous surrounding or by their duped or scandalous Crips. The premise was that any Crip armed with correct knowledge about himself, culture, spirituality, and the world would see the light and begin to change. He explained how fortunate he was to have been assigned to our yard because we, Tretch, Evil, and I helped him tremendously. Been sent to another yard, he admitted he would be gangbanging. This was a refreshing moment to see a man open up with no reservation, no fear of humiliation or ridicule. This illustrates how a young do-or-die Crip, not of my generation, was intelligent enough to acknowledge our scholastic teachings as a sign of strength. Moreover, it was a validation of the value of the transition from being a Crip to an adult, Afrocentric male. None of us could relate to other racial groups until we established a firm footing of our own, and then began to reach out. Any form of positive awakening behind these walls of chaos can be considered a miracle, especially since the age-old mechanisms that engender racism, violence, collusion, deprivation, frame-ups, and other injustices continue to exist here. Though I was finding internal peace, I was not exempt from the external chaos. That was made perfectly clear the day I returned from the yard and learned that all my property had been confiscated. There was a note on my bunk informing me that due to a criminal investigation, my property had to be searched. A week later, when my property was returned, many pictures were missing from my photo albums. An attached note stated that after the photos had been copied, they'd be returned. There was another confidential disclosure form placed on the bars, alleging that I had issued orders for certain staff and inmates in East Block to be hit. This was one of many examples of the authorities' stool pigeons dropping ice that melts into lies.